Most of what you read about empathy focuses on the absorber. This is the classic empath who acts like a sponge, soaking up the stress, sadness, or anger of everyone in the room until they are physically and mentally heavy with emotions that aren't even theirs. They get lost in the noise, drowning in the feelings of others until their own identity starts to blur. This is the version that textbooks describe, the one who ends up in therapy, perpetually burnt out and desperately needing to protect their energy. But there is a second, far more surgical type of empath that researchers and psychologists have struggled to pin down. This isn't the empath who gets swept away by the tide. It's the empath who stands on the shore and sees exactly where the current is coming from. While the classic empath mirrors and merges, the Indigo Empath watches and processes. You aren't just a passive recipient of emotional energy, you are an active decoder of it. When you walk into a room, you aren't just feeling things, you are analyzing them at a speed that feels like instinct. You don't just feel the heat of someone's anger, you instantly see the fear or the rejection that ignited it in the first place. Carl Jung, one of the fathers of psychology, called this the intuitive type. He was fascinated by individuals who possessed a depth of pattern recognition so profound it almost felt like psychic perception. He realized that for some, the primary way of moving through the world isn't through logic or basic senses, but through a constant, deep-level reading of the unspoken. Modern neuroscience is finally starting to catch up to what Jung observed nearly a century ago. We now know that the human brain contains mirror neuron systems and a quote-unquote default mode network responsible for social simulation. In most people, these systems run at a standard definition. But in the Indigo Empath, these systems are operating in 8K high resolution. Your brain is running continuous, unconscious simulations of other people's inner worlds. It's as if you have a separate processor dedicated entirely to mapping out the psychological history of everyone you meet. If you've always felt like your empathy operates on a frequency that no one else can even hear, this neurological overclocking is the reason why. Sign 1. You don't just feel emotions, you decode the why. For the average person, empathy is just emotional contagion. It's a simple reflex. Someone cries, and they feel a tug of sadness. Someone yells, and they feel their own chest tighten. It is reactive, automatic, and often shallow. But for you, the process is entirely different. When you encounter an emotion, it doesn't just hit you like a wave. It arrives like a massive, high-speed data download. You don't just sense that a colleague is grieving. You feel the heavy, dusty layers of that grief and realize it's connected to a loss they haven't spoken about in a decade. You aren't just guessing. Your nervous system is literally feeding you the context. This ability turns every social interaction into a deep dive investigation, even when you aren't trying to investigate. When a family member lashes out in anger, most people would get defensive or angry in return. You, however, feel the sharp sting of the shame hiding underneath their words. You see the insecurity they're trying to mask with volume. It's as if you have a backstage pass to the human psyche. Your nervous system accesses data points, micro-expressions, vocal shifts, and energetic wrongness that other people's systems simply aren't calibrated to collect. The result of this is both an incredible gift and a heavy burden. You often understand what someone is going through better than they understand it themselves. You see the wound beneath the behavior before they've even admitted they're hurt. This is why people might find you intense, or why you feel like you're constantly holding the truth for everyone else. You aren't just sensitive, you are a biological lie detector and a psychological profiler rolled into one. You are navigating the world with a map that shows the hidden tunnels and foundations, while everyone else is just looking at the surface of the buildings. Sign 2. Out of place, not broken. Think back to your earliest memories, all the way back to the playground or the family dinner table. You likely remember a persistent, nagging feeling that you were viewing the world through a different lens than everyone else. It wasn't that you were antisocial or that you didn't like people. It was simply that you were tuned to a frequency that no one else seemed to be receiving. While other children were occupied with the surface-level mechanics of play, you were observing the invisible dynamics of the room. You saw the flicker of sadness in a teacher's eyes while they smiled at the class. You felt the heavy, unspoken tension between your parents at dinner, even as they passed the salt and spoke about the weather as if everything were fine. To you, the pretend world that adults lived in felt bizarre and confusing. You wondered why people said things they didn't mean, and more importantly, why they meant things they never had the courage to say. For years, you might have interpreted this gap in perception as a personal flaw. Because you saw more than the social environment was designed to handle, you felt alienated. You might have been told you were too sensitive or overthinking it, which led you to believe that something was fundamentally broken inside of you. But the truth is the exact opposite. You aren't broken. You are operating at a much higher resolution than the world around you. Imagine trying to play a high-definition 8K video on an old boxy television from the 90s. The screen would glitch, the image would lag, and the hardware would overheat. That is what happens when an Indigo Empath tries to fit into a standard social environment. The environment simply doesn't have the bandwidth to match your depth. The moment you stop trying to lower your resolution just to make others comfortable, the glitching stops. You realize that your alienation wasn't a sign of failure, but a sign of a specialized architecture. When you finally embrace that high-definition perspective, you stop seeking validation from people who are literally incapable of seeing what you see. And that is the moment your entire life truly begins. Sign 3. The instant deception trigger. One of the most intense and often isolating parts of being an Indigo Empath is your relationship with the truth. You don't have to go looking for lies. They have a way of finding you. You don't need to be a cynic or a suspicious person for this to work. It is an involuntary biological response. Before your mind has even had a chance to process the words someone is saying, your body has already reached a verdict. It's a shadow detector that functions at a level far below conscious thought. When someone is being inauthentic, whether it's a massive betrayal or just a small, polite social lie, your nervous system registers it as a physical disturbance. It might feel like a sudden microtension in your chest, a slight wrongness in the air, or a jarring disconnect between the person's words and the energy they are radiating. Carl Jung described this as the intuitive perception of the shadow, the parts of a person they are hiding from the world and quite often from themselves. To you, inauthenticity isn't just an annoyance or a social faux pas. It feels like a violation of the natural order. It's like listening to a beautiful, complex piece of music and suddenly hearing a screamingly wrong note. You can't just ignore it and keep enjoying the song. The wrong note ruins the entire experience. This is exactly why Indigo Empaths tend to keep their social circles incredibly small. It's not because you are judgmental or because you don't trust people. It's because your system literally cannot tolerate the static of fake behavior. You require realness the way other people require oxygen. You prioritize a few deep, honest connections over 100 shallow ones, because you would rather be alone than spend your energy navigating the exhausting, jagged edges of someone else's mask. To you, the truth isn't just a preference, it is the only environment in which you can actually breathe. Sign 4. Shallow talk drains, depth restores. If you've ever looked up advice for empaths, you've probably been told 1,000 times to avoid crowds and protect your energy from other people. But for the Indigo Empath, that advice usually feels like it's missing the mark. You've likely noticed that you can be in a room full of people and feel completely fine, yet 5 minutes of mindless small talk with a neighbor leaves you feeling like you need a 3-day nap. The problem isn't the people, it's the noise. Your system is built to process high-level data, so when you are forced to engage in surface-level chatter, the weather, sports, or performative social pleasantries, your brain effectively starves. It's like trying to run a high-performance engine on low-grade fuel. You aren't just bored, you are being neurologically drained by the lack of substance. You find the posturing, the fake smiles, and the social quote-unquote masks people wear to be physically exhausting because your brain is trying to find a signal in all that static, and there simply isn't one. However, watch what happens when the conversation shifts. The moment you find yourself in a raw, honest, one-on-one interaction, everything changes. If someone stops pretending and starts talking about what actually matters, their fears, their real dreams, or a deep truth they've never said out loud, you don't drain. In fact, you illuminate. You'll notice your focus sharpens, your heart rate steadies, and you suddenly have more energy than when you started. While others might find deep topics heavy or depressing, for you, they are oxygen. You are finally receiving the type of connection your nervous system was specifically designed to handle. You aren't an introvert who hates people. You are a seeker of depth who is looking for the rare, honest connection that most of the world is too afraid to dive into. You don't want to isolate from the world. You just want to stop wasting your energy on the shallow end of the pool so you can swim in the deep. Sign 5. Carrying the pain of strangers. One of the most confusing parts of being an Indigo Empath is the way you can be hit by a wave of emotion from someone you've never even met. You could be watching a documentary about a tragedy in a country halfway across the world, or simply passing a stranger on the sidewalk who seems perfectly fine on the outside, and suddenly you feel a lump in your throat. You might find yourself carrying a heavy, unexplainable sadness for the rest of the afternoon. To an outsider, this looks like an overactive imagination or being too sensitive, but there is a real biological reason for this. You possess what researchers call a permeable psychic membrane. Most people have a thick, rigid boundary between their own feelings and the feelings of others, but your boundary is thin and fluid. This isn't a choice you're making. It's the way your brain is wired. Your default mode network, the part of the brain that constructs our understanding of other people's mental and emotional states, is hyperactive. It's running simulations of the inner lives of people you've barely registered consciously. When you see a stranger's pain, your brain doesn't just recognize it. It mirrors it so accurately that the distinction between their pain and your pain becomes neurologically blurred. You aren't just imagining how they feel. You are literally experiencing a version of that emotion in your own body. The challenge you face isn't to stop feeling. That's impossible for someone with your architecture. The real work is learning how to let that emotion move through you, like water through a pipe, rather than letting it settle in your system like sediment at the bottom of a lake. Once you realize this pain isn't yours to keep, you can acknowledge it, honor it, and then let it go, preventing it from weighing you down. Sign 6. The too intense label. If you are an Indigo Empath, you have likely spent a lifetime hearing the same handful of critiques. You're too sensitive. You're taking this too seriously. Or the most common one, you're just too much. For years, these words probably felt like a heavy weight, leading you to believe that your natural way of being was a social burden. You likely learned to dim your light, to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, and to keep your deep observations to yourself just to keep the peace. You performed a version of lightness that felt fake, all in an attempt to make the people around you more comfortable. But it is time to realize a fundamental truth. When someone calls you too intense, they aren't actually making a statement about your character. They are revealing the limits of their own emotional capacity. They are essentially telling you the exact depth at which they begin to feel overwhelmed. Think of it like a water line. Most people are perfectly happy splashing around in the shallows where things are safe, predictable, and superficial. Because you were born with the ability to breathe underwater, you naturally head for the depths. When you bring up a real observation or ask a penetrating question, you are inadvertently dragging them into deep water where they can no longer touch the bottom. Their discomfort isn't because you are broken, it's because they are terrified of what lives below the surface. Your intensity acts as a mirror that reflects the parts of themselves they aren't ready to face. To someone living a lie or hiding behind a social mask, your ability to see the truth feels like a threat. Your depth isn't a flaw you need to fix. It is a specialized form of perception. The work isn't to reduce your intensity so you can fit into small rooms. It's to stop handing your depth to people who aren't equipped to hold it. Sign 7. Solitude as recalibration. For the Indigo Empath, the need to be alone isn't just a personality quirk or a sign of being an introvert. It is a biological necessity. While standard social advice might suggest you're isolating or being antisocial, you know that your time alone is actually the only thing keeping you sane. When you go to a forest, sit by the ocean, or lock yourself in a quiet room at the end of the day, you aren't just looking for peace and quiet. You are engaging in a process called downregulation. Because your nervous system is tuned to such a high frequency, you are constantly absorbing, decoding, and processing a massive stream of emotional data from every person you encounter. This burns through your baseline neurological regulation at an incredible speed. By the time you get home, your system is redlining, vibrating with the accumulated static of a dozen different people's energies. Being alone is how you clear that static. In deep solitude, or in the presence of nature, the external noise finally stops, allowing your internal noise to settle. It's like a muddy glass of water being left to sit until the sediment falls to the bottom and the water becomes clear again. This is why nature feels so healing for you. The ocean or the woods don't have masks, they don't tell lies, and they don't have hidden agendas. They provide a neutral sensory environment that allows your hyperactive threat detection circuitry to finally stand down. For you, solitude isn't about being lonely, it's about maintenance. It is the essential counterweight to a life lived at a level of intensity that most people couldn't survive for an hour. You don't retreat because you hate the world. You retreat so that when you finally step back into it, you are calibrated, centered, and ready to use your gifts with precision instead of being overwhelmed by them. Sign 8. The weight of purpose. Deep inside, you have always carried a quiet, persistent sensation that your sensitivity isn't a random glitch in your personality. It doesn't feel like an accident or a burden you were cursed with for no reason. Instead, it feels directional. You've likely had this sense since you were young, a feeling that your ability to see through the masks, to feel the unspoken pain of a stranger, and to decode the hidden layers of a room was actually a specialized tool meant for something specific. This isn't about grandiosity. You aren't looking for fame, a massive platform, or a title. It is a vocation or a calling in the most ancient sense of the word. It is the realization that you carry a finely calibrated instrument, a psychological and emotional radar that was designed for work that requires absolute truth and immense depth. While others are satisfied with surface-level success, you feel a magnetic pull toward roles and situations where your unique ability to navigate the human psyche can actually make a difference. This weight of purpose is the reason you can't just turn it off and live a simple, shallow life. Your nervous system won't let you. When you try to ignore your intuition or settle for a life that doesn't use your gifts, you feel a profound sense of fiction, like a high-performance machine being used to do a job it was never meant for. You are beginning to realize that the very things that made you feel different or isolated are actually the credentials for your real work. Whether that work is in healing, creating, leading, or simply being the one person in a room who has the courage to speak the truth, your sensitivity is the engine behind it. You are starting to see that you were built with this specific architecture because the world desperately needs people who can go where others are too afraid to venture. Your purpose isn't something you have to invent. It's something you discover as you stop apologizing for the depth of your perception and start asking where that perception is needed most. If there is one thing you must take away from this, it is that the Indigo Empath does not heal by trying to become less sensitive. For years, you may have tried to toughen up, to grow a thicker skin, or to numb your responses so you could fit in with the average person. But you cannot heal by mutilating your greatest strength. You heal by becoming more intentional. You heal when you finally accept that your nervous system was not built for every room, every social circle, or every person. You are a high-resolution specialist in a world that often settles for low definition. You were built for the conversations, the connections, and the contributions that most people never reach simply because they weren't wired to go that far. Your depth isn't a liability. It is your primary asset. Stop apologizing for being too much. Stop shrinking yourself so that people with limited capacity don't feel intimidated by your presence. The problem was never your intensity. The problem was the environment you were trying to squeeze it into. The question you should be asking yourself moving forward isn't, how do I change? But rather, have I found the places and the people where too much is exactly what is needed? When you find your right environment, your sensitivity stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like power. You haven't lost your way, and you certainly aren't broken. You've just been navigating without a map for a long time. Now that you know who you are, you can stop trying to survive the shallows and finally start masterfully navigating the depths you were born for.